Unexpectedly, DNA recovered from the victim provided a link with the Ashford rape 8 months earlier. This 1 to 14 million DNA match confirmed that the two attacks were carried out by the same man. Police were now hunting a serial rapist.
We'd fast-tracked samples to the Forensic Science Service, and we were informed that there was a potential link between our crime scene in Red Hill and the attack on the young girl in Ashford. And that's when I think everybody started to think that maybe this is part of a much bigger picture.
The Red Hill victim had also caught a glimpse of her attacker. She described an older man.
The problems that we had in the Ashford offence with the age of the victim were overcome because suddenly we had someone that was much closer to the offender's age, and we know that the closer in age a victim is to an offender, the more accurate they are in describing how old the offender is. So we've suddenly gone from thinking the offender was in his mid or late 20s, or maybe his early 30s, to thinking he was actually more likely to be late 30s or in his 40s.
Just 6 hours after the Red Hill attack, the rapist used the M25 to travel to Putney Common. He struck again.
Members of the jury, you will recall he said, "You're quite nice looking. You smell nice, better than the last one." She was able to give you a limited description of her attacker. He was a white male, very tanned, not particularly tall, but quite strongly built. You then heard evidence from her mother and sister as to the very distressing telephone calls made shortly after the rape. Her mother received a call from a man speaking, she thought, with a northeastern accent, who said to her, "You know your daughter, the blonde one. I've just shagged her."
Seemed to be enjoying what he was doing so much. Take one of the offences where he phones the victim's mother afterwards. Now, there's things you don't have to do. That's increasing the risk in terms of you're speaking to somebody else that can identify your voice. You are potentially putting fingerprints on a phone. There's a whole host of investigative reasons why you really shouldn't be doing that. But what's overriding all of those is his desire to further the offence and to demonstrate to people, how good he is, and just that arrogance and that cockiness of what he's done and the disregard for that victim is absolutely striking, and we don't see that generally amongst rapists.
Hello, Chrissy. I'll always love you, no matter what you think.
As far as Christine knew, she had an ideal husband and the perfect marriage.
And it's fucking breezy.
I think as soon as I saw him, I fell in love with him. And it was absolutely wonderful from then on. Tony really made me feel loved. Really, really made me feel loved. And I hadn't felt that before. We had a wonderful life. I mean, until he started working on the railways, we had an absolutely brilliant time. We used to go off at weekends. Before we had the camper van, we still used to sort of go out and about for days. Sort of a mystery tour. We used to end up wherever, Brighton or something. We had wonderful holidays, made some good friends on holiday. No, Tony! We had nice times away. Yeah, and it was brilliant. And we're a very lovey-dovey couple, We had just good fun and good laughs.
I do this for you, because I love you. I love you, Christine Imiela.
Christine's teenage daughter, Cheryl, was still living at home.
When Tony came along and he just gave my mum something I'd never seen before, she had a smile on her face and a twinkle in her eyes that I'd never seen in her before. So I knew this man was making her happy. But you get that natural feeling whether you're going to sort of bond with somebody. And with Tony, I did feel there was just something uneasy about him. I didn't trust him. I felt like there was a side to him perhaps my mum didn't see or didn't know about.
He did have a heart of gold. As far as I'm concerned, he was a lovely guy. And when he asked me to marry him, I did. I didn't think twice about it because we were so happy together. And it was an absolutely beautiful day. Our sex life was wonderful. No, it was wonderful, and couldn't better it. It was fun, I think we'd both got to the age where we could enjoy our sex life. And we did. You know, it's absolutely brilliant.
Antoni Imiela was leading a double life, but his ability to keep the two lives separate was becoming strained. His predatory sexual behaviour seeped into the family home.
I was in my room getting changed. I'd just been in the bathroom, and I was wearing just a dressing gown, which I hadn't done up particularly well. Or I was in my room, you know, I just privacy and everything. And Tony came in quite suddenly, you know, opened the door, and he would never normally come into my room. He would knock, obviously respecting the fact I was a teenage girl. I wanted my privacy. So as I turned round and saw Tony, it was a very quick moment of, I think it was something, do you want a cup of tea, he said. And it was like, no thanks. Within the same moment realising I was perhaps uncovered. And I was embarrassed. He certainly looked embarrassed, and that was that. But that evening he did suggest that, you know, looking back on it now, I understand. He said to me, did you mean anything by that earlier? Straight away at that point, I thought he means that he wanted me to mean something. I thought he was trying it on with me.
In August 2002, a massive police hunt called Operation Ald began for the M25 Rapist. Police had his DNA profile, but still couldn't catch him. Antoni Imiela worked on the railways. His recent promotion to supervisor meant that he was less accountable to his bosses for his time. With this new freedom came opportunity.
You have this interesting gap between the first offence, November 2001, and then nothing that we know about until the following summer. And then a sudden explosion of offending, not just another rape, and then a long gap, and then perhaps another, but 2 rapes on the same day. Once we started to get offence after offence on a weekday in working hours, we became fairly happy that he was offending around his work.
He'd done very well for himself on the railways. He passed tests to become he had a certificate of site safety. He was in charge of men. He was enjoying it. He was earning good money. We'd bought the house.
On reflection, what we now see is a combination of probably 5 or 6 different factors coming together. The offender gets a new job. He's suddenly an autonomous lone worker as opposed to going to work in a van with his work colleagues. He's free to move. He's got great knowledge of the routes along which he can pick his victims, but he's also anonymous in those areas. But it also gives you problems because where somebody works doesn't necessarily equate to where they live. And it's far more difficult to identify people that work in a particular location than it is people that live in a particular location.
The massive spread of the rapist stalking ground meant that every woman in the area served by the M25 was now a potential victim.
I think the bigger the inquiry got, the more risks he took, because he just loved it. And he loved the media attention that stemmed from it. To be known as the sort of worst serial offender since the Yorkshire Ripper, I think he was probably feeling quite proud and chuffed about that and wore it almost as a Medal of Honour.
He's built up this role of sort of super rapist in his own mind. That's what he's operating to, that's what he's trying to live up to. And he's even communicating that to some of his victims. Typical words of a serial rapist was one comment that he made to one of his victims. We need to be very careful to try and get the media to not paint him in a very different way to the way he perceives himself. Because if you paint him as something even bigger than he actually thinks he is, he will aspire to be that individual.
All of us on the inquiry, and that's from all the different forces, you know, almost became depressed by the fact that we couldn't find him. You know, the inquiries, it was massive, it was huge. Yet despite that, you know, we felt as though we were no nearer to catching him than day one down here.
The police believed that the rapist was using the M25 as a web to prey on his victims. That summer they investigated 4 rapes that they were convinced were carried out by the same man. Women and young girls were warned that they could become his next victim. Meanwhile, Christine was oblivious to her husband's activities.
We got on so well together, happy together. So I really got no worries. I didn't know anything was going on at all. Where did he find the time? Where did he find the time to do all this, and why? Why? That's the one thing I still want to know, is why? What made him become a rapist?
What we do know about the way sex offenders work is that they don't wake up as middle-aged men and suddenly become serial rapists. They evolve over a period of time, and normally their sexual offending would start from the age they become sexually active, which typically, depending on someone's development, would be 15, 16 years of age. When you look at Antoni Imiela, you see that he began offending at the age of 15.
From an early age, Antoni Imiela led a life of crime. He has convictions for theft, burglary, GBH and drug dealing. He spent 9 years in prison following a series of violent armed robberies in 1988. At the time, this made him one of the most wanted men in Britain, but not for rape.
I think the link for Antoni Imiela is the elements of risk, control and violence. All of those factors feature in his earlier convictions for other types of offences.
If you go back through the offences and you look at the way in which Tony interacts with his victims, the language he uses, the threats he makes, the exit strategies he uses, so stay there, count to 50, don't get up, I'll come back and kill you. If you then overlay an armed robbery scenario, that language fits just as well, but I didn't quite make the step specifically to armed robbery. Now that's important, because if you say to Kent Police, identify all your armed robbers, we might have found him. If you say to Kent Police, identify all your violent offenders, there's too many. We've missed that opportunity.
A post-war German refugee, abused and humiliated by his violent father and abandoned by his mother, Tony had a dark and troubled childhood.
I think he was about 9 or 10 when his mother one evening said that she was going out for fish and chips for the family, and she never came back. I think this was so devastating on him. And I've got a lovely picture of Tony as a young, very young boy, and he looked absolutely beautiful, and I sort of still look at this picture and think, you must have been totally heartbroken when your mum left. I remember when we first got together, even if I went in the kitchen to wash up, come on, Chrissy, come back in here, you know, he'd want me to cuddle him. He wanted every minute, you know, and we were always cuddling, but he really wanted a mother's love to start off with. He really did want a mother's love. That was something that had always been lacking in his life. He bought me this, which I absolutely adore. Well, I suppose it must have been the year before he was arrested. It shows that he has got a heart of gold inside, and I really don't know what's gone wrong.
On the 6th of August 2002, a 52-year-old woman walking her dogs on Wimbledon Common became the rapist's eldest victim.
He walked me back exactly the path I'd come along. And we went on walking, and he seemed to be really relishing in my distress. And I really thought, I don't just want to be a dead body that's found on Wimbledon Common, and you know, he's going to kill me anyway. I've just got to make a break and try and get back to my car. Almost immediately, he pushed me down. So I just, you know, let him get on with it.
Members of the jury, you'll recall that as to his accent, she said that he was a Geordie, but thought he had spent time in the south because he did not use Geordie slang.
after he raped